It's a gorgeous night, so thank you for taking the time to be here and have this conversation. So this is the first conversation that we're having about what we want parking to look like in downtown moving forward. We know that parking is a very important part of our economic landscape, and as we continue to think through the implementation of our downtown vision and the Village Corridor Initiative, it's time for us to be intentional and think through what we want it to look like as we move forward. So there's a couple goals for tonight. So we'll first learn and understand the current parking conditions in downtown and regulations. Then we'll go through some options to consider and variables to consider as the town looks forward to think through the future landscape. And most importantly, for most of the counselors or all of the counselors, is to start hearing from folks in the community about what's important for parking and what we do want it to look like in the future. So before I hand it over to staff, I'll just ask counselors to just introduce themselves by name. I'm Joanna Benoit. I'm the chair of council.
Eric Smith, District 2 Counselor and Vice Chair.
Steve Brown, Counselor at Large.
I'm Dan Pilch, Counselor from District 1.
Good evening. I'm John Egan. I'm also a counselor at large.
Matt Pillsbury, District 3.
All right. Thank you very much. And with that, I will hand it over to our wonderful staff.
So we're going to dive right in and talk about parking in downtown Freeport. This is a quick crash course for those of you that aren't familiar with it. So there's a few types of parking in Freeport. The easiest one goes first, and that's on-street parking. It's typically owned by the town. It will sometimes have restrictions, hour only, 15 minutes. It's usually striped, but not always. And we currently don't charge. So if it's a striped space, you can pull over, park, go along your business. So we have about 127 on-street parking spaces in downtown Freeport. The other type of parking that we have in downtown Freeport is off-street parking. And this is the primary supply of parking in Freeport. It can include multiple things. It can include surface lots like you see out front. We have a big parking garage. We also have some pedestal parking, which is kind of like a small garage that's under some buildings. We have a couple of those. If you're not sure where they are, you can find them on your way home. One of the things that makes Freeport unique is that underneath all these different sources of parking, we have different property owners. And so in most cases, most of the parking you see is actually owned by private individuals, not the town of Freeport. I'll show you a map in a minute. And so when we talk about downtown Freeport, we joke about this at the planning board sometimes because depending on the conversation, people will define downtown differently. So when I say this downtown broadly, from generally the railroad tracks out near public safety, all the way up to the Harris Seekett Inn. But sometimes it shrinks. If we're talking about village commercial, it will shrink in a little bit. We might not include the Harris Seekett, we might not include public safety. But generally speaking, for the purposes of this conversation, between the railroad tracks or the railroad bridge and the Harris Seekett, there's about 3,000 off-street parking spaces. If you participated in the downtown vision plan, you've seen this map before. This gives you a glimpse of what we have for parking. The red is building and the gray is parking spaces. So this was done in 2022, and this shows where our approximately 3,000 spaces are. There's about 2,500 on surface parking lots and about 500 in the parking garage. So one of the questions we always get, who owns all the parking? As time's gone on, we've seen more turnover. There's more individuals or companies owning parking, but I called out 3 of the largest holders. So one is LL Bean, and they own about 1,000 spaces in downtown Freeport. The second would be the parking garage, which is about 500 spaces. These are estimates. They'll vary a little if you want to go and count them later. And then the town of Freeport owns about 175 spaces. Freeport's unique in many ways, which is what we say. And one of the ways is this idea that we share, and we share our parking. You know, you think if you go to a shopping mall, one person owns it, ton of parking, ton of stores in close proximity. Freeport, we have a ton of businesses that you can go to. Like I said, whole bunch of people own the land underneath, which makes it complicated. In the early 1980s, Freeport instituted a shared parking system. Most of us share. You can come to town, park once, shop wherever you want, eat wherever you want, spend the day, enjoy downtown. And so people say, how do I know if it's shared parking? Well, in Freeport, you don't see many signs like this. You just park, right? Sometimes you see signs like this, like it could say Caroline store only, for example. But more often than not, people choose to share their parking in downtown Freeport. This was so important to the town that they wanted to encourage it. So they've done that through land use regulations. So there's a whole bunch of land uses, and we have a couple pages of parking, but this is just a sampling. So for retail and restaurant, for example, if you choose to participate in this shared parking, meaning you don't put your sign for your customers only, your parking requirement would be 1 space per 300 square feet. We have a special way we calculate square footage. Won't bore you with that tonight. If you choose to not share, like for example, town hall during normal hours, it's not shared. Anyone can park there if we're not open. You have for retail restaurant a higher requirement, more than double. You'd have to provide 1 parking space per 150 square feet plus parking for your employees as regulated by the ordinance. So parking has changed. We regulate it through our land use ordinance, which is a working document. So as we've wanted to see change and make things happen in downtown Freeport, the regulations have changed and been amended. This is really an oversimplified version of some key points. That would be good to know as we talk tonight and hear from the community. So in the 1990s, Freeport developed leased parking as part of their shared parking program. And what that meant is if you wanted to come to Freeport and open a business, you wanted to develop your site or go into an existing store, but you didn't want to build a parking lot or you didn't have parking laying around to use, you could lease it from somebody that had extra parking. So we do have people that choose to not build their parking. Instead, they lease it from somebody who has extra. A lot of complexities. The town oversees it to make sure everyone's fair, but it is a program that exists. Currently, there's about 85 spaces being leased through that leased parking pool that people are leasing to meet their needs. That changes, new businesses will come in, conditions will change, so the number can fluctuate, but this was what it was today. In 2018, the town of Freeport, after I think 2 years, made significant changes to the parking requirements. And this was to lower the parking minimum required for businesses. We changed the number of spaces per square foot in many cases, and we also changed the way that we calculate it. And so the talk back then was that by doing so, we would reduce the burden to landowners and developers, and we would free up land that we could use for other purposes. When those changes were made, we were already starting to see shifts in retail and vacancies. What nobody knew is there was a pandemic right around the corner, which further impacted. So we made those changes. We know that there's spaces existing on the face of the earth that are not meeting a land use requirement. They're just sitting there. They're extra parking. So people could hold on to them or they could choose to redevelop them. In 2022, after we completed the downtown vision plan, there's a desire of our community to promote housing in the downtown. So we again amended the land use regulations to lower the requirement for multiple family buildings, as we were hearing from developers that that was a barrier to development. We also clarified that they could participate in the shared parking system. One thing to acknowledge here is that depending when a business came in and what the standard is, we might not all meet the same standard. If you've been here or you came in where there are no standards, you might not provide any parking. If you were providing parking pre-2018 and we lowered the standards, the ordinance gave you an opportunity to get the lower rate. So everyone's meeting a different requirement depending when they came into Freeport. Now I'm going to turn it over to Brett to give you a little background on the parking lot usage data that we have.
Thanks, Caroline. Brett Richardson, Development Director for the town. And I'm going to share a little snapshot of how the town goes about collecting data and what we know, where some of the gaps are, and how we've used this in the past. So it's important to note as you look at this, these percentages, 2016, 2021, and then summer of 2025, those percentages are unoccupied parking spaces. It's important to note from a sort of a methodology and data collection standpoint that this data is heavily skewed towards weekdays and non-holidays. So that's when staff's around doing the collection. And so it's probably safe to assume that weekends are a little bit higher. We also believe higher, meaning there's more folks using the parking. And then there's also a general assumption that there's probably 10 or so peak days a year, holidays, festivals, that rainy day in July, that day right before everybody's doing their last shopping for the holidays, when most of the parking, if not all of the parking, is full. So this data has some limitations to it, but it allows staff to understand year over year what some of the trend lines are. So you can see that in 2016, the unoccupied spaces hovered in the 40 and 50% range. 2021, post-pandemic, that bumped up to 60 to 70%. And then this summer, particularly in July, it's ticked down a little bit, but we're still in that 60, 70% unoccupied during the week in Freeport. It's also important to note, taking this with a grain of salt to some extent, FEDC and partners have been working really hard, and we know that our vacancy rate is now as low as it's been in a long time. We haven't seen that traction filter into more demand for parking. And it's also important to note too, that the town's been making pretty significant policy moves to invite infill development on some of these lots. And we're seeing interest, but that hasn't shown up yet in unoccupied parking spaces. So we have year over year trends to help us understand the direction we're heading in. And that's a snapshot from a staff level of what we know right now. I'm going to turn it over to Kyle Drexler, our planner.
Thanks, Brett. Kyle Drexler, town planner. So what I wanted to go into is just a little bit of an overview of parking and some different options that exist out there in zoning and land use regulation when it comes to parking. So, some of this is more informational, some of it can be tied to Freeport specifically. But it's really just meant to serve as some background to kind of show the spectrum of options that exist. So Caroline touched a little bit on this before. There's a few different types of parking that we see, right? There's on-street parking garages, surface parking lots, and they all come with their own individual pros and cons, right? On-street parking is great for a couple of reasons. It allows for more infill development. You don't need as many surface parking lots. Those lots could be used for infill redevelopment projects like multifamily housing or mixed use buildings or things like that. There's a lower cost attached to it because you probably already have the space built out in your road. There's a natural kind of traffic calming effect, like we've talked about in some other conversations. You have this ability to narrow down the street through the parking itself. But there's some cons as well. There's often limited capacity for this type of parking. It means less space for other types of improvements the community might want to see, things like bike lanes or wider sidewalks, street trees. And there could be a higher need for enforcement, whether it's like a time-based thing like Caroline alluded to earlier, or paid on-street parking. Parking garages are good for a few reasons, right? There's a lot of capacity in a really compact space. So again, it frees up all this other land and streets for other purposes. You can take away some of those surface lots potentially. You can use your streets for more of those other types of amenities, but the obvious downside there is the incredibly high, oftentimes initial cost to construct those sorts of structures. Also, there are certainly some visual impact components when you're talking about parking garages and, certain styles that are used sometimes. And then the third option, the surface lots, the pros are fairly obvious, and it's why, we see so many of them oftentimes in communities. It's a lower cost than something like a parking garage. It's really easy for people to access, just pulling in and finding a quick space. But, the cons are pretty evident. We've talked about this in the downtown vision and other places like that. It has the possibility of, spreading development out, which discourages walkability, can be an inefficient use of space, instead of a parking lot, for instance, you could have a land use used for housing or businesses or, anything like that. And oftentimes it just kind of invites from a placemaking standpoint, not as ideal of an aesthetic when you're just looking at potentially a sea of parking lots. So those are sort of the three options. Any one of these could be paid or unpaid. That really comes down to a policy decision from municipality. So moving away from the types and looking more at kind of the range of how do municipalities potentially regulate off-street parking specifically. So on the left, you have something like your more traditional parking requirements where, this is typically what we see in more suburban environments, right? Where every land use has a minimum parking requirement and each use provides their parking on their lot. So everyone is doing it on an individual basis. That's the more traditional method. The pros are, there's obviously a lot of parking being built. So there's usually an abundance of parking attached with this style and method. You're rarely short on parking. The negatives, kind of what we just touched on with the surface parking lots though, is, you have the potential to build too much parking and really overregulate and provide more than you need in your community, which has its own downsides. A step up from that is doing shared parking by agreement. So, you still have that municipality role of setting a minimum parking requirement. But instead of every single use having to build their own parking lot, maybe a couple property owners right next to each other share one parking lot because they utilize different peak times of operation or something. So this cuts down the need to build so much parking, and it takes advantage of these shared private agreements. Where Freeport falls in, what Caroline talked about earlier, is this notion of shared parking by default. So people can opt in kind of upfront into our shared parking strategy. So, we still have that minimum parking requirement per business where, if you come to town for whatever use you are, whether it's housing or restaurant, office, you have a minimum parking requirement that you need to meet. But the incentive is that it's a lower rate by entering into the shared parking pool. And that lets people come in and use any of that shared parking, regardless kind of where they're traveling in the downtown area. So it's not this, well, I'm going to this business, so I have to park here. And now I'm going to this other business, and now I have to drive, over there to go park there. And then on the kind of furthest end of the spectrum, away from the traditional method of, regulating parking, is having no minimum parking requirements at all. And that's just letting the market kind of dictate, what, developers and of businesses and housing projects, build what they feel they need. And I mean, the obvious pro there is you're probably not going to end up with more parking than you need. It frees up all that space for other amenities in the community. The downside is, is it as convenient as the traditional parking method, where, people might have to park, a little further away from the specific place they want to go because parking is viewed more on a global kind of lens throughout the district rather than, okay, I'm going to drive right up to the door of the business I want to frequent. So it's a range. There's pluses and minuses to all of them. But this is sort of the tools that communities use to regulate off-street parking typically. And then finally, I just wanted to kind of walk through a few different options as, we sort of, after this meeting and staff and council starts to explore potential things that can be done. This is not in order of preference. This is simply three examples out of many that exist potentially that the town could look to explore. So one is keeping our existing method, right? We have free shared parking. So by definition, shared parking in our zoning ordinance cannot be charged by the person developing the shared parking. So by definition, shared parking is free in our ordinance right now. We also have the not shared parking, which has the higher minimum parking requirement. Currently, that's unregulated, right? There is no definition for not shared parking in our ordinance currently. So we could keep this, method. Two is, making some incremental steps to possibly simplify or clarify our existing ordinance language, right? So, we could define not shared parking. So if it comes out that the community really loves the idea of free parking or paid parking in downtown Freeport, we could, work on those definitions of shared and not shared parking to clarify, what the community is really looking for. We also have this, actual land use in our Village Commercial 1 district for a parking lot, when a parking lot is a principal use on a site. So imagine like an entire lot, it's only dedicated to a parking lot. That's an undefined term there too. So, there's some room to work with some of our existing terms and ways we handle some of these things in our zoning ordinance to modify them to, our current needs and what the community wants. And then the third option would be, right, a more extreme deviation from what we currently do. Looking at an entirely new way of regulating parking downtown. Something like I talked about on the last side, like on that fourth option there, where you don't look at it so much as the municipality requiring a minimum parking requirement per use. You look at parking more globally, and we get there through whatever means the community wanted. It could be through more on-street parking. It could be through, something like park and rides outside of the downtown. It could be through, developers providing the parking that they feel their use needs. It could be through, some sort of in lieu fee some communities use, and then put that money towards town-led parking and transit projects in the sort of district that we're talking about. Again, not a recommendation on any of these, but these are sort of different steps that the town could take depending on community sentiment. So that's my overview of parking sort of in general. I'm going to turn it over to Sophie to start getting into some of the questions and feedback from everyone here.
So this is new technology for me on this side of the podium. We've broken the public feedback into three kind of separate, discrete sections. One, council kind of wants to understand where get some answers to some questions from folks tonight. It's important to us to understand kind of who is in the audience. So Ken, you brought up a really good point. What we really want to know is the one thing that you identify as for the purpose of this conversation. What lens are you speaking through? If you're a resident or a business or property owner or other. Yep. So the first column is showing residents. The next one are Freeport business owners or representatives, but they're not property owners. The one that has 8 is downtown property owners and 4 others. We're going to go to the next one. Here we want to know how important is maintaining free public parking in downtown Freeport? first going across, very important, somewhat important, not important, or no opinion. And it does not surprise me in Freeport to have 0 for no opinion, just. So, the next question is, should, charging for, public parking in Freeport should be allowed? And we're asking where? On street, off street, both, or neither? And we talked, who should be allowed to charge for public parking in Freeport? Municipal, meaning the town only? Private companies only? A mix of the town and the private sector? Or neither? So after this wonderful presentation from planning staff, do you feel like you understand parking in Freeport? And it's really great that 0 people said not at all. So at least we have some understanding. And the last is, if you need to know more about public parking in Freeport, what information would be helpful information for us to share? And the big ones here are the impact, the cost, unknown, actual needs, what's the goal, online, parking regs, what's the goal for parking regs, what the vacancy data collection is. Don't mess things up. Share owner info, ownership of spots. So I think if I look at this, there is, want to know about the negative impact, Heritage Street. So, grandfathered no parking. We had a really big debate at the staff level as to how we were going to, or if we were going to talk about that tonight. So we're taking all of this information, and hopefully it will give us a laundry list that we can present or create some materials to be able to circulate and post on the website and other places, and also in future meetings to make sure we answer some of these questions. So I'm not going to shut this down because people are continuing to put words in, and I think it's really important long-term for us to be able to answer these questions and have information available. The second element that we wanted to make sure we did before we turn this back over to Joanna for public comment is to answer questions from staff or the council about the presentation. So if you have questions that are technical in nature, we want to make sure we get those out. And then our portion will be kind of done, and we'll open it up for public comment to get more of a dialogue and discussion going. So were there questions about the presentation?
My name is Matthew Brees. I'm a Freeport resident, and also I work in one of the local businesses as a manager. I have some comments, but I'll save them for comment time. But my question is, at the end of the day, is the decision whether or not we're going to pay for these lots or have them be paid, is that going to be a voted on issue by residents, or is that going to be a decision made by you guys?
You know, we're at the very beginning of the process, and I honestly don't know. I think that depends on sort of if there are sweeping changes or not. And I think what you'll see kind of moving forward is, right now we're in the information finding and data finding part of the conversation, and we'll continue this transparent process and have more meetings and more open discussion about any decisions moving forward. So, yep.
Yeah, I'm Mitch Root. I'm a resident. I'm on the planning board, but I just had a question about the rules for businesses, and maybe you could just help us understand better I was surprised when you said there's only 85 shared spaces, because I thought, well, if every business needs to have parking and they don't all have property for the parking, how could there only be 80? So do only some businesses need parking? What's the rules?
Those 85 spaces are people that are leasing them from somebody else. Everyone else is providing them on their own, whether it be through surface spaces or garage spaces. Those are just people that are leasing them from others.
They could buy into the garage. I'm just trying to clarify that every other business except for those 85 spaces has their own
Yeah.
parking on site that they share or don't share.
So, Mitch, I think what might be helpful to understand that is that it's not individual businesses that are required to provide their own parking. It's the way the ordinance is written is it's the property owner. And so Freeport Village Station, as example, provides parking for all of the tenants of Freeport Village Station. So no business needs to lease if their property owner is already providing the parking.
This is Dave Hammond. I'm a business owner here. So what's the timeline that we're looking at implementing these changes? Do we know, we have a projected timeline?
You know, I can say it's probably not going to be fast. This is going to take quite some time, a couple of years, I would think. Yeah.
This would be a question for the staff, I think, and that is, how does the effort in this parking workshop and future parking fit into, if at all, to the village? What's
The Village Corridor
the
Initiative.
village corridor
Yeah.
initiative? Thank you.
So how does it fit into that? Is that the question? I mean, I think parking is a very key part of the economic landscape as it dictates who and how and what people are doing to enter our businesses and enjoy our downtown. So I think it's directly related to it.
I want to hear from Brett.
Thanks, Chalmers. No surprise there. The Village Corridor Initiative is really focused on the Route 1 corridor. However, they're going to be working on a build-out analysis too to understand what kind of development potential is available there in and around the corridor. So we're going to have that level of data in a couple months probably as a starting point. And understanding what that potential is, we'll understand what kind of infrastructure we need, including parking, right? So Kyle laid out an option. Maybe there's a strategy down the road where a garage makes sense, but there's a lot of work to be done in the meantime. And I think we'll know more about that through a build-out analysis fairly soon.
Great. I want to take a second to go back to the gentleman's question about timeline of changes. You know, maybe there won't be any changes. That's part of the conversation we're having right now is we're taking a deep look at what parking is in downtown, what works, what doesn't work, what are barriers, what we can or maybe do want to adjust or clarify. But we don't know if there will be anything that changes quite yet. This is the very beginning of that conversation. Right over here.
I'm Sally Walsh. I used to live here. I still own.
Good to see you. Hi.
I have a basic question, maybe because I'm old. Where did the shared parking, so many spaces for this business and everything? What's the point? I mean, does there money involved? Do you have to share your candy bar? I mean, is there anybody monitoring this? I don't understand what the whole purpose is. If you threw everything out, what would happen? I don't get it.
Yeah, Caroline or Kyle, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so I think you're getting at the minimum parking requirements, really. So, I mean, a lot of places around the country, right, they zone and zoning ordinances will have minimum parking requirements. They're oftentimes based on like peak traffic generation numbers. So that's why for years, the kind of massive parking lot attached to the strip mall kind of became a thing in a lot of places, and communities started to pull away from that. Caroline mentioned the town went through in some of those timeline slides, some efforts to reduce parking minimums as a result of, recommendations out of the downtown vision and things like that to open up some of that space for, other actual projects like housing projects or things like that. So minimum parking requirements were a way for communities to guarantee that, in an kind of automotive landscape, that developers would build adequate parking to provide for their business. And you wouldn't be creating nuisances by having people parked all over the place and creating access issues and things like that. I think in some cases it went, probably overboard and overregulated the issue. And that's why, we've reduced minimums over time and we're having conversations like this. And, some of the plans we've done as a town have indicated looking at reducing parking minimums. And as I mentioned in the presentation, there are some communities in some areas like downtowns where, they might have a very steady supply of municipal parking, for instance, and they don't require any parking minimums for businesses because they know they have that guaranteed supply of parking at the town level. As Caroline talked about, parking here is a little unique. We have some municipal parking, but it's not the most dominant form of parking in our downtown area. We have a lot of privately owned parking that could transition to other uses potentially. So it's not necessarily as simple for Freeport to just say, yeah, get rid of parking minimums and everything will be fine. So that's kind of the conversation we're having though, but that's where the basis of where those parking minimums come from in the first place.
Can I add to that, Kyle? So in addition to the minimums, another layer on top of that is the shared parking. So if I have a store and I'm required to have 6 spaces and Steve has a store and he's required to have 6 spaces, if we set up shared parking, we may agree that, all right, there's 8 spaces and we share them between us. So overall, it's a fewer number of spaces that we have to have. It reduces the amount of parking lots in town if we have the shared parking. One of the consultants we had along the way and one of our many planning projects said one of the things you should strive for is a park once strategy. So people come to Freeport, they park, they leave their car there and they walk all over town. A lot of other towns, you park at the grocery store and then you move your car to the convenience store, then you move your car to the drugstore. We don't do that in Freeport. So that's the shared piece of the shared parking in addition to the minimums that Kyle was talking about.
Hi, me again. So I'm hearing all that you're saying and I understand what you're saying and the shared parking and the different rules. I get all that and you've laid it out great, wonderful. I think the root question that I have is what prompted this? Is it we don't have enough parking? We have too much parking? We need not enough resources, too much resource? What was the whole impetus for this whole thing to start to begin with? Because I mean, from where I can see it, it's one of the beautiful things about Freeport is that people can come here and free parking, Freeport, okay, and that is beautiful. And it also increases foot traffic. There was a study in 2023 that showed it. It lets people park, like you said, walk around, spend as much time. They're not worried about the meter running out or getting a ticket because they're overparked. They can spend more. And what is this town built on? We have retail. That's it. That goes away. The town goes away. We're all looking for something else. So I'm wondering, okay, if we're looking at changing something that's really so important, my first question is, well, why? Are we doing just because we want change or is there something really driving it? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think at minimum, at the baseline, there's a lack of clarity and confusion and maybe some lack of definitions. Kyle touched on that in his part of the presentation. And I think, as I mentioned before, there's no guarantee anything will change. I think this is just sort of a point in time where it feels important as we're making these investments and have these plans for the Village Corridor Initiative and taking a close look at what works and what doesn't work in downtown, making sure we're not leaving parking out of the conversation. Yeah.
I think some of it goes back to the downtown vision planning that feels like forever ago, but it's still something we're really in the midst of. So when we had the principal group come here several years ago and look at what our downtown format was, they looked at the land use and they said, look, you have this cluster of retail surrounded by a sea of surface parking. There's a format that's called, it's a mall. And that is very much what Freeport, downtown Freeport has been for a lot of people for a long time. As part of the downtown vision process, the question is, what do residents of Freeport want the downtown to be? And I think there was a strong emphasis on having it be more than a mall, still with retail as a big emphasis, but really much more, particularly looking at residential uses and other amenities that would round out what more residents downtown could accomplish. And so the council, the planning board, lots of folks for years have been looking at how do we incentivize more housing downtown. And one of the easy targets is to look at land that is otherwise not developed because it's a parking lot. So we've done a parking study. We know that some of the parking we have downtown is excess, at least according to the reports, and that was in the presentation a bit. But where is the balance between how much land do you need to set aside as parking is the best use of that land, but you're also trying to move some of that into housing? At some point, if you're consolidating parking, I think that's the question, is where is the parking going to go?
This way, it's for the people at home.
You're looking at changing the identity of Freeport from being a retail location, which is exactly what it has been known forever, to get away from that identity and merge it into a more or a less commercial or more residential look. Is that kind of what because that's what it's coming from.
Not less commercial, but yes, more residential.
Well,
So
I can't have that both. I mean, it's either gonna be, there's only so many square inches of land here. I mean, this is what it is. I mean, how do you make it
you
more?
can grow the pie.
Okay, but when you do that, you have to pay, there's a price to pay for that.
Absolutely.
And the price is gonna come from the retail.
And
That's what we have. It's the only money we have is the retail. So if you want it, you gotta trade it off. It's just logic. I mean, it's just,
Got some
we get to.
questions coming in on Zoom as well.
So do
Okay,
you think
sounds
we're
good.
ready to move into public comment?
So I think we might have some Zoom questions. Maybe we can take a look at what's on Zoom.
Let me get Jessica.
I also want to make sure for the
I
technical.
actually have microwave, a microphone. Ooh, it's a microwave. So it looks like we do have one question that just came in from Kristen, who wants to know, there are also downtown properties that have second floor space that can't be apartments due to parking restrictions. Okay, so we have a comment.
Great. Any other questions?
That's the only one.
Okay. Before we put it back out to the crowd, I do want to check in with council and see if there's any questions on the technical aspect of the presentation from staff. Okay. How about we take a couple more questions? And I think this again, so I think we're kind of slowly morphing into the public comment period. So if there's any other questions, we'll ask those and then move forward to the comments.
Okay. Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. I had a question about, I'm sorry, I missed the beginning of presentation. When were these studies that said we had excess parking done? Were they done during COVID or prior to COVID? Because if we're looking to grow, I would argue that we don't have excess parking because I already have a pain point in parking as a local person who during COVID prioritized shopping local versus online to try to keep our money local. I think adding pay for parking is short-sighted for the locals to continue to use the businesses that are here versus doing the easy thing and clicking. It's really discouraging to hear that this is even on the table as a local.
Do you want to answer the
Yeah,
question?
Brett, can you answer the question about when was the data collected for the Walker study?
So the Walker study came through a grant from the Greater Portland Council of Governments. They used largely the data that I showed tonight, right? The traditional parking counts. They also looked at it through a shared parking model, meaning they used national data that looked at the square footage of retail in downtown and what the trends are for how much parking retail uses. They looked at the national trends around what a typical housing unit would need for parking. And so they came at it from the data that the town collected, as well as their own shared parking model to understand where we're at this point in time. And as we alluded to with that data slide, it's a fluid environment, right? And so the data that they had was COVID centric. And also there was higher vacancy rates. And so I think there's two ways of looking at the Walker study. And one is that we have a pretty large surplus that we should change policies to respond to. Another way to look at the Walker study is to say that we've changed policies fairly dramatically. We've increased the businesses downtown. And so we should see how these changes move through the system and impact the supply that we have now. So in some ways, the Walker study says we should make more moves. Another way to look at it is we've made the moves. We haven't seen the impact of those moves. So let's take a pause and give it a little time and see where we're at.
When did you do it?
The Walker study was, we got the grant in 2022, essentially on the heels of the reduction for the minimum for a residential unit when we dropped that down through a planning process. And essentially what we heard was that's the right move, but we also heard some of the voices in this room that said, you know, hold on a little, let's take a bait. I'm a little concerned about this. I'm concerned you're going too fast and too far. So we got the grant, commissioned the study, and that was the origin of that process. That was completed, submitted and presented to the council a few months ago, largely based on data from 2023.
So I just want to, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm Brenda Roderick, a resident, and I want to know if the study was done prior to the LL Bean tent taking up the 225 parking spaces?
It used data counts that were captured when that tent wasn't there. So there was actually more supply at that point than there is in July of 2025, because there's now probably with that lot and lot on Depot Street that for a period of time had barriers on it. There's plus or minus 200 parking spaces that were scrubbed out of the supply. So when you see the percentages in July of 2025, those are based on a slightly smaller pool than the original data that factored into the Walker report. That makes sense. Does that make sense?
Are we ready to open it up for public?
So I think Jackie has a question, then we'll move over to public comment.
Hi, I'm just questioning your data that you put up. You had 2000, I think 17, then you went to 2021, and then you jumped to 2025. 2021 was COVID, right? So we didn't have a lot of people parking in Freeport. And 2025, excuse me, if you don't know the numbers of the town and the vacation time right now with the tourists coming in, we are, I think I heard something like 44% down this year. And it was very low last year. So you're only counting the bad years, which concerns me because over 2 years ago, 3 and 4 years ago, our numbers were skyrocketing and we needed all that space. So I would like to see a much more thorough every year from, if you want to start from 2017, fine, but let's do all the way. Secondly, when you posted all the comments, I couldn't read them. I don't know if anybody else could read any of those comments that everybody was posting. I would have loved to have seen it. It was just hard to see it on that screen.
So to the last first, we will pull apart those questions. The bigger ones had more people saying similar things, the smaller, we'll pull them apart and put them as part of the wrap up to this online.
So I think we've pretty naturally morphed into public comment.
All right.
So I do want to open that up with really kind of an emphasis of, you know, hearing about like what works, what doesn't work, what's important to folks as we move forward in our considerations.
Joanna, before we start public comment, for purposes of all the people watching on Zoom,
Oh, yes.
we're gonna have the public line up over here and comment at the podium.
Okay, that sounds great. So we will not be doing the microphone walking around. So if you would like to make a public comment, please walk up to the podium. And if you can introduce yourself, that would be great.
So basically, this is obviously addressed at you guys. A lot of the presentation today seemed like it was made by city planners, which it basically was, and it sounded fantastic. You guys have great ideas. However, I would like to put forward, have you thought about thinking about this issue from a customer's perspective, not from a city's perspective, a resident's perspective? Because the difference to me seems like a lot of what you guys are talking about with the ordinances changing slightly for owners and for leasers and whatever, it sounds great to me, I suppose. I don't really know much about it. But I think why this room's so filled is because of the perhaps optional pay to park thing that might be considered. And what I have to say on that is basically, if you're A, making people pay for parking, B, taking away surface lots and building on top of them, or C, a mixture of both, what you might risk doing is turning into a shopping center, which Freeport, in the minds of New Englanders, for a while at least, even if you build some houses, it's going to be a shopping center. So in the minds of a customer, and if I'm driving down east to go to Acadia or something, and I got a day to be in Freeport, if I have to worry about, I paid my meter for 2 hours, I parked on Depot Street, now I'm all the way at LL Bean. Every time I make a purchase, I'm checking my phone, how much time is left in my meter before I have to go back. So then what I'm going to do is I'm only going to hit the spots I already know. I'm not going to hit any of the local spots in between, maybe people that just moved in, people that need that business. And then if you're building on top of them, there's not enough parking or I have to pay, I might just skip Freeport, you know? Like if in my mind, it's more of a headache than I care about getting the new collection, then I might just skip it. I might just drive up and camp in my old clothes, you know? So that's something to consider. You got to think like a customer, which I'm sure I'm saying nothing you guys haven't thought about already. You guys are smart folks, but just something I was thinking about down there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Davis, president of FEDC and a resident. I do not have a PowerPoint. I do want you to know. I'm
That's
kind of
for
known to them.
Tuesday.
At FEDC, we spend all of our volunteer time looking at the economic sustainability of mostly downtown Freeport, but all along Route 1, because we know as a resident, which I am, our taxes rely upon the viability of downtown. It's so important to us. And so when we did the downtown vision, it was very clear that parking was super important to us, that we've been doing the idea of free parking for a very long time. But it was also apparent to us that we needed to add housing into downtown because we lost all the residents that we had for many, many, many years. And so the idea of doing right sizing on parking, I think, is a really important theme that came out of the downtown vision. What that right sizing is, we're trying to find it. Brett's trying to find it. Kyle's trying to find it. So we need to right size it. That's correct. And I think you ask, and we need to find place to put housing downtown because we know our businesses are also saying to us, we want business in the wintertime as well as in the summertime, and having residents downtown will help us. Now, why are we here? We're here because it's not clear now. We have a couple of folks who have decided to do pay for parking. And what we think at FEDC is we have to be clear about it. Because when we're talking to businesses about how to come here, and yes, we have the lowest vacancy in downtown Freeport that we've had in 20 some odd years. We're very pleased with that. But what we're telling them is we have free parking. And so if we're going to change, we need a clarity about it. And we need a statement sort of from the town about which way is it going to be. I think to be half on both won't work for us. It confuses people. So that's why we're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
I'm Mary's counterpart. My name is Tawny Whitney. I'm the Executive Director of the Freeport Chamber of Commerce. I'm also the Business Director for FEDC. I'm here tonight to share significant concerns that we have about the recent implementation of this paid parking. It came as quite a surprise to our business community. I actually have never had my office filled as quickly before, with a number of people coming in concerned, worried, outraged about the fact that they saw this UPP sign come up without any warning. Several people have asked me to speak for them tonight. And they did this because of a trust that's been developed. And I truly believe that success comes out of this trust. And that trust was changed when they saw that sign kind of put upon them. So, I know there's a lot of people that have a lot of comments tonight. I am honored to represent our business community. And I just want to say in simply that we are strongly against paid parking at this point, and especially having something done so without communicating. When we did the downtown revision work, I would say I've thought about it a lot, and I thought about it very much a lot today. And I really believe that one of the reasons why the downtown vision was so successful is because we did so as a community. We wrote on Post-it notes, we listened to each other, we came together like we are in this room. And with that became success. And to Mary's point, we've been very hard working on the downtown area and getting the vacancies filled again. We now have 5.7% vacancy rate downtown, a rate we haven't had since 2013. So I encourage you to continue to work together, to listen to each other, and keep free parking for now.
Thank you, Tawny.
Hey everyone, I'm Maria Nappi. I'm the president of the Freeport Chamber, as well as a resident in town and a business owner almost. I'm here representing the chamber tonight in opposition to the implementation of paid parking in Freeport at this time. The chamber's had ongoing conversations with our business partners throughout town, and the feedback we received was clear. Introducing paid parking right now would put an added strain to local businesses that are already navigating labor shortages, rising costs, and post-pandemic shifts in consumer behavior. Free accessible parking is one of the few advantages our downtown area still offers over a lot of the other communities and online retailers. We're concerned about the impact on visitor experience. For many people, parking fees can create a barrier and shorten their time in town, which detracts from business, especially the restaurants that we're really trying to bring in. Adding friction to this process, especially without a compelling and clearly communicated benefit, feels like a step in the wrong direction. More importantly, the proposal for paid parking doesn't align with the larger vision we've been working toward through the downtown revision process. As a community, we've been investing a lot of time and energy into reimagining Freeport as a more walkable, welcoming, and business-friendly community. Paid parking, especially if rolled out prematurely, sends a message that contradicts that vision. We're undermining a lot of the progress that's been made in strengthening the heart of town. That said, we're not shutting the idea on this, or the door on this idea forever. We understand that as Freeport grows and changes, how we manage public spaces, including parking, may need to evolve as well. The chamber is open to future conversations about paid parking if the need arises and if there's strong support from the business community. But right now, we believe there are more pressing priorities and better ways to support downtown development and economic vitality. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and we look forward to collaborating on a solution that's beneficial to town's long-term health and its economy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, you guys. Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Sparta. I live down on South Street. I have a Freeport Oyster Bar right behind the Historical Society, and I'm opening up a new shop in the old Mallet building to sell sandwiches. Before I talk about paid parking, I'd like to talk about a ridiculous rule we have here in Freeport, which is we can't park on the street from November until May. So put that on your agenda for things that you're going to talk about for parking, because we want to have more residents downtown. They're going to need a place to park. It's low-hanging fruit. You guys can just fix it, right? We can just have a thing that goes up in front of the fire station that says, there's a snowstorm, don't park on the street today. Everybody else is doing it. It's what all the cool kids do. We need to switch that. So as far as paid parking goes, I will say that the Historical Society was very nice and pulled me aside and let me know that there was going to be a change in the parking lot behind the bar, which was great. And I can understand the Historical Society's need to take what is an expense and move it over to the side of their budget where they're actually making a little bit of money. I get that. I will also say that their choice of partner, or maybe the unprofessionalism of their partner, or maybe their partner not understanding Freeport, or however it worked out, it was a fraudulent atrocity and shouldn't be repeated. I watched many of our customers drop money to UPP and they didn't need to. We were taking money out of the pockets of people that would like to otherwise give it to us. So I think before we go to paid parking, let's look at other ways that we can perhaps use up some of those extra spaces. Let's think of ways that we can make this town more appealing for people to come to. And at the same time, assist our nonprofits that have these expenses. I don't know what those ideas are specifically. There were a few that were in the vision statement. One of them was drawn perfectly in that parking lot that we're talking about, where, you know, we would have different markets each day of the week. I don't know what the answer is, but I know there's an answer out there. And I know there's a lot of smart people in this town, and I know we can figure it out together. But in the meantime, this is not the year for paid parking from the standpoint of my business. I can tell you that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ken.
Hello, I'm Sebastian Mead. I live here in Freeport, resident, and I walk around town constantly with my dogs and doing other things, plus riding a bike. And the thing that I keep hearing people, it hasn't really been mentioned a whole lot tonight, except for briefly from Ken, but I keep hearing people trying to say is that we should have parking all the way down Main Street to slow traffic. That doesn't work. The few spaces that do have parking on both sides, I can guarantee that it doesn't slow the traffic. It actually makes it, as a pedestrian, it makes it scarier. Because if I'm trying to cross the road, the cars don't see me anymore. Where there isn't parking, they do. And the other thing that I want to bring up too is, as people bring up that idea, I want to know where the delivery vehicles are going to go, because there are about 4 loading docks in the town of Freeport. All the delivery vehicles are throughout the day on Main Street. And if they're going to have to park with people parking on Main Street, it's just going to end up jamming up Main Street because there's nowhere for them to pull over. So that's where I'm at with that as a pedestrian, walking, riding my bike, car doors, all that fun stuff. So I just want to bring that up as concerns when people keep saying we need parking all the way down Main Street.
Thank you.
Pay for parking for Freeport's a bad idea. I'm Mike
just introduce
Marino. I was one of
yourself?
the original developers.
Can you just introduce yourself?
I'm sorry?
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I will.
Yeah.
I'm Mike Marino. I'm one of the original early developers in town, developing Banana Republic, Gap, the Lobster Cooker Restaurant, American Eagle, and many, many parking spaces, which we still own today. The original precepts for development in this town was ample free parking. It worked. There was a day in which Freeport was probably one of the most successful retail communities in the country. And part of the reason was that people could come to Freeport, they could get out of the car, they could park. It was eclectic, it was exciting, it was a lovely place to do business. And parking was difficult to obtain. Originally, the concept was 7 parking spaces for 1,000 square feet of development plus employees. So you can see that the value that we placed as developers and all business owners that we placed on the town on that parking. The Freeport it's a great village. It's a great location. As you hear from some of the other testimonies here, business is starting to come back. It will come back, and when it does come back, it's going to be a great place to do business, and the parking will end. And there is going to be more requirements for the parking here. Give it a chance. Stay with the precepts that work, which is the free parking. Don't be pissing off our customers like we see happening in Portland quite often these and other places where they have paid for parking. I think that's one of the things that makes this village a great village. But our location is great. We got LL Beans, we got a lot of great businesses, we got a very motivated community. The retail will come back, it'll add to the property tax revenues and also anybody that has surplus parking, as I do, we will be compensated at some future point in time for the parking that we have, but don't put it into the paid parking. It's a bad idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chalmers Hardenberg. I live in the Somerset condominiums. I wanted to talk about aesthetics. And I'm split because on the one hand, I think seeing the paid parking signs behind St. Jude's, just, I didn't think it looked that great. And I understand there was some pop-up paid parking behind the lobster store there for a while. And thank you, Ken, for telling me that it's now gone, but it was there. And aesthetically, I don't think that presents a great view. On the other hand, I appreciate what Sebastian said about having parking on the street, and also what our parking guru guy or walkable city said about having parking on the street. That would be great, and that made a lot of sense to me. But again, aesthetically, I'd rather not see cars there. So I'm just presenting my nuanced vision of what we're going to see or not see with paid parking. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Jackie Soley, and I'm looking at this on so many different levels. I'll start at the bottom. I am a Freeport resident who likes to shop. I go from one area, I know all the parking spaces I can get into really quickly and get out and go to the next one, maybe on the other side of town, especially in the snow. I don't want to walk the whole thing in the middle of snow. I want to get where I want to go, and I want to go. And CVS, same thing. If you've got to pick up your medication, you're going to be there for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But for the elderly people, for the people who are struggling right now because the economy is having a tough time in Freeport, we don't want to pay extra. And that's on us. I'm not talking about the tourists, I'm talking about us. On the next level, I am a business owner. I was building my parking lot when Fred was running the program, and he said, look, we don't want to see that much hot top. We want you to share your space with other people. And I'm like, really? I don't have to make 42 parking spaces because I can seat 42 people? And he said, no, don't do that. Great, it worked out fine. And I feel that the whole town was doing that there is sharing because you don't want to see that much hot top. But don't forget that we also have LL Bean concerts. They get packed, right? And we take up all those parking spaces. And if you forget days like that, we're in trouble. Where are these people going to go? They're going to leave. They're not going to stay. They're not going to, if they can't find a parking place, they're going to just go on to the next event, go to the next town. If I have to sit here and pay for parking, I'm going to go to Brunswick and shop. I'm not going to pay here. That's crazy for me. The other thing is I want you to recognize that Freeport is quaint. When you drive into town, you see the stores in little houses, and that's great. When you drive anywhere else, you see the parking lot and then the building. We don't want that. We want to see the building, and we don't want to see the parking lot. And that's what's behind the buildings, is all the parking that nobody sees when they drive into town. And then when they go to park, okay, they'll find it. But again, I don't want those customers to have to pay to park because, like someone said, they're going to watch the time. They're not going to shop as long. We've got a lot of shops. We want to support those shops. We don't want to drown them in bills. And then lastly, as a taxpayer, when you talk about building houses downtown, not houses, whatever, apartments, condos. The first thing you brought up was parking garages, and that scares me. I'm thinking, oh boy, there go my taxes again. My taxes just went up. I don't want to pay for parking. I don't want to pay for underground parking. If you want to sell off some of the land and make that company who's bought the land build parking for their residents and still have enough for all the downtown people, great. But I don't want to be, as a taxpayer, paying more taxes for garages. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew Arsenal. Couple things. I don't think we should ever pay for parking in Freeport. I'm completely against it. I've lived here all my life. I don't ever remember paid for parking in Freeport. I also would advocate for some parking on the street because I think we overthink most of these things. It's going to be too busy. Somebody's going to open a door. I still use the same example. Everybody wants to go and park on Exchange Street or somewhere in the Old Port because it's the best, coolest place to go. And there's parking, and you circle around a couple times and you find a spot. I remember going to the Old Port in the 70s and the early 80s when it was just starting to happen, and it was a happening spot. And we went and we drove around and around and around until we found a spot. So I'm not scared of parking on the street. I'm not scared of people opening doors because that's just the way it works. We're over-engineering all this stuff. We're looking at every little problem, and we're looking at every complicated solution of, we got to have a barrier here and we got to have something there. People will figure it out for themselves. We don't need 10 engineers to tell us how to get across the street. Make people use a crosswalk maybe, that works. So as far as, what we're going to do with some of these lots, we all understand shared parking pretty much and what's going on. I'm concerned with the amount of parking we've allocated for housing. I think it's too low. I know that's not a popular theme, but I think if we don't have one parking spot for each, say, unit, I don't know how somebody parks a third of a car there. So, or whose car that is a third of a car. So, and the last thing is that I think I sort of feel this is a solution looking for a problem. And I know it's always good to sort of look at things and see how they go, but I'm concerned that we're just sort of looking, we're looking for a problem to solve. So, because I think right now, if we had the stores all full and the place was packed all the time, that there might be a little bit of a problem, but I don't think there really is. I think people will figure it out. They'll come here, they'll find a spot, and the more we fool with it, maybe the worse it gets. Rents aren't that high anymore. It's not like in the golden days when it was 55, 60 bucks a square foot, plus a triple net. It's not that great anymore. So to throw some monkey wrench into this by paying for parking, sticking up another sign, my parking only, not a good idea. So thanks for the forum.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jared Levin. My wife Jen and I have been business owners in the community for about 10 years. Thank you for holding the hearing tonight. Tawny mentioned earlier that vacancies in Freeport are down to a 20-year low, which is good news. We want to encourage the council to also consider traffic and town visitation statistics in addition to vacancy rates. We've, like, as I said, been business owners for more than 10 years. We're fortunate that we can also sell on the internet. And 10 years ago, we were selling 0% of our revenue on the internet. Today, it's about 25%. So, fortunate for us, but that doesn't do anything to help the town or the community. I can tell you on traffic statistics, it's been very, very stagnant. And I haven't seen good data on overall visitation to the town. But what I would say is if the vacancy rates are down, that's great. That's good news. It does seem a little bit tenuous and fragile in that, from what we can tell, a lot of the recent rentals they're not long-term fixed rates, which suggest long-term confidence in staying in the community. They tend to be shorter-term rentals. They're a percentage of rentals, and they're not long-term triple nets. So that sounds to me like testing to see, is it going to work? And that type of a tenant might be, again, more tenuous. And so when you combine sort of stagnant visitation with a lot of short-term rentals, the momentum we've built in recent years could easily evaporate and reverse. And retail is, if nothing else, it's a momentum business. When you have positive visitation, people can come, they see the good things happening in a community, then they go home and they tell their friends, and then they want to come back again. When you're having falling visitation, everything works in reverse. It becomes a downward spiral. So if we've got a little bit of a spark here, let's not stamp it out by having paid parking. Let's kind of fan that spark and try to rebuild positive momentum, positive traffic for the community. And so that would be our suggestion. Great. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Jim DeGrandpré, and I work at Wolf Neck Center, and I'm on the Historical Society Board in Freeport and also the Chamber of Commerce Board in Freeport. All my good friends. I just wanted to add a little perspective from my position serving on the Historical Society Board. And I was president for a couple of years ago. And this is really not, and I would like to say, nobody's really talked about the Historical Society tonight. And the fellow back here kept saying, why are we even talking about this? Where'd this all come from? And I think it probably came from the recent contract that we had signed with some paid parking folks, and that kicked off poorly the paid parking concept in Freeport. The issue for us is really about the cost of maintaining parking in that lot. We have spent, every year we spend at least $6,000. Right now we have a $30,000 bill that for paving that parking lot. We have 46 spaces out there, 16 of which we used for our tenants, like our good friend Ken, and for our own purposes and that sort of thing. And so there were 30 spaces that we were offering about, what would that be, about 1% of spaces available in the town of Freeport that we were putting into this sort of parking concept. And I would say to you that it wasn't that we're thinking that we want to change the face of parking in Freeport in any way whatsoever. Our challenge is it's difficult for us and for the people who support us to understand why we're putting as much money we are in our budgets to pay for parking spaces for LL Bean. And we have some awesome LL Bean spaces. They're right out in front of the tent. Everybody wants our spaces. And paying for Banana Republic, good friends there, and the Gap, and so on. It's a considerable cost for us. And many look at us perhaps as having lots of money. I can promise you, having been the author or at least the person behind our annual budgeting, we are not that way in any way. It takes us weeks and weeks and weeks to put all of this together. We have wonderful people in Freeport, wonderful businesses, many represented tonight, and certainly including the town of Freeport, who support us. And we are very grateful for all of that. So I just want to say that, you know, we are not slamming our fists on the podium saying, we've got to have this happen. We need paid parking. It's a concept that we insist on. We don't feel that way at all. In fact, we'd be very happy to talk about some alternatives to help us with our challenging position of paying lots of money each year for spaces that we don't really even need. So I just wanted to offer that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Valerie Williams, and I live here in Freeport. I want to thank Mr. DeGrandpré for his perspective. I have, despite that, the opposite opinion for a number of reasons. First of all, is community. I feel like, particularly as the Freeport Historical Society, for me, a member of the town, to have first heard about this as the parking going up, especially a company that I've heard has been absolutely decimating the city of Portland. To write that contract with that company is so offensive to me as a member of this community. I can't even begin to describe it. Second of all, while I understand for sure that it is really hard out there for a nonprofit, particularly the Historical Society, which is not maybe in vogue as a nonprofit. I also feel like maybe letting the town know before doing something so assertive, borderline aggressive, would have been more community-based. It really is disappointing that this is like, the first I hear about it is the signs going up and this very big reaction from not just the community, but also other business owners. It feels attacky. It doesn't feel community-based. And I think that's why you're getting such a strong reaction, is because if you needed help, we should have heard more about that before we started hearing about us paying a member of our community. And that's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Oh, can you guys hear me? Good evening, everybody. My name is Katie Wise. I'm the Director of Design and Construction. I'm here with LLB, and so I'm here on behalf of them. First, thank you for all the comments tonight. Thank you for the forum. I want to start by saying very simply, LLB is opposed to paid parking in downtown Freeport. A lot of the things that I've heard tonight bear probably repeating as a thank you. I had them in my notes. But the first one is, I, like many of you, LLB, have been part of the downtown vision. I've been on the Zoom calls during COVID. I've been in the audience and hearing all of that. And although there are some excess and spaces, we can talk about that. LLB is very concerned about how those spaces are used. So when there is excess spaces, we want those to be able to be used for things like development, good, smart strategy, and not have these land be caught up in multi-year lease agreements with paid parking contractors. We are very committed to downtown, as is evident in our multi-million-dollar investment to our flagship. We are excited to see that open, and when that happens, the tent will come down, the 75 spaces will come back up. And we also want to say that there is no such thing as LL Bean spots. So yes, people might talk to them about our spaces, but they are a shared pool. We do not have signage that says LL Bean only, and that is because we are committed to the shared parking model in downtown Freeport. The other thing I'd like to address is the customer. I thought the first gentleman who spoke did a wonderful job, but we in retail think deeply and long about customer journeys, customer experience, and particularly dwell time. We do things as a company, the concerts, various things, because we want customers to come, stay in downtown. We do not want there to be a literal meter of their time, feeling they need to check in. We want to decrease barriers for customers, and we want to be visitor friendly, which Freeport has a great reputation for. We feel that paid parking in downtown will curtail growth, reduce business revenue, and deter development. We own and operate over 60 other regional retail stores outside of Maine, and we have actual evidence of different stores we've had that didn't have parking. Paid parking was implemented in those developments, and our revenue went down. With that, I will just say thank you, and thanks for the time.
Thank you. All right, we'll take this final comment, or maybe two more comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. Just one quick thing that I wanted to say. I was just remiss in not saying, because the woman who spoke, I think after me, said this. One of the things that we have been doing for the last 5 years, we've actually been approaching the town. We've approached the town council, town manager. I mean, we have been talking about this. This is an issue for us. It's been an issue for us for 5 years. So I would just offer that it wasn't just something that one day we said, gee, let's try paid parking. So I think that that's important to understand as well.
Thank you.
I just want to note we have people on Zoom, so although they can't speak in the room, if they would like to comment, they could type that into the Q&A, and Jess Chadbourne, our new assistant planner, would happily read that into the record.
Thank you.
So that might just take a minute if we could check back in with her now that people are aware how that's working.
Thank you. Keeping me in line. So before we'll give folks a couple minutes for that, I mean, I personally really feel like this was council's role to listen and learn and hear. But I just want to check in with my co-counselors if there's any thoughts to add. Go ahead, Councilor Pilch.
We're not ready to make any decisions tonight, so there's no kind of final thoughts on the matter, but just some things that are swimming around that I think we'll all collectively have to be wrestling with. most of them have been already brought up, but to summarize again, it's not a single decision that we're faced with. It's not a, oh, it's this or this. There are a lot of decisions that are coming together. How many parking spaces do we want to have in town? Do we want to have more for businesses, less for housing, vice versa? Do we want it to be free versus paid? If it is paid, is it on street versus off street? Is it just the town who can charge? Is it private entities who can charge? So there are a lot of things that all are interconnected. Some things that we've been told and some thoughts that I'm considering. One is we've been told not to plan to have parking for everybody every day of every year. We've heard that there are going to be some peak days, rainy summer weekends, maybe a Christmas weekend, where it's okay to have all the spaces be full and have there be pressure in parking. How many days and how many how many people are still in need of parking is debatable, but that's one of the things we've been told. Another is if we do paid parking, in my mind, it was interesting to consider municipal paid parking versus private paid parking. And would it really be fair for the town to say, well, we can charge, but you can't charge? One of the things that's become apparent to me is there is a difference because if the town charges for parking, then the fees collected stay in town. They go to our general fund, presumably Bar Harbor gets a few $1 million a year in fees from residents and visitors who pay for parking. If it's a private company that's charging for parking, they will always charge more because they're in business to make a profit. And those profits are likely, unless it's a Freeport-based parking business, are likely not going to stay in town. They'll leave town. So as Katie was saying from Ella Bean, when we think about the merchants and the amount of money that we're drawing into the Freeport economy, there's a difference between municipal and private paid parking. Not that I'm advocating for municipal paid parking, but it's an interesting thing to consider. So that's all I wanted to say. It's a complex decision. There are a lot of moving parts. I welcome more comments if people think of things after the forum. I also want to reach out to the Historical Society again. It's only become apparent to me personally within the last few months that there are financial pressures and the parking is related to that. When I found out, I made the offer, and I'll make the offer again, that if there's another way to solve that problem, I'm all ears and would be happy to help.
And I just do want to echo that that's a conversation that I've already had with our town manager, and I think that conversation will be happening imminently, for sure. I agree. Anybody on Zoom? Go ahead.
Yep, we do have a couple. From Kristen, who made a comment earlier about second floor spaces. We also have that she would like to see a conversation about the timed spots and the customer experience about giving tickets for timed spots. And then we have an additional comment from Alyeba. Good evening. This is Alyeba, owner of the Denny Block. We also originally developed the Freeport Village Station project. We studied the concept of paid parking several times during our ownership. We concluded that payment in any amount was going to be a significant drag on the overall sales in the village. That is why we never charged for any of those spaces during the time when we owned the property.
Great. Thank you very much. I just also, I think Councilor Pilch, you did a great job summing up some of the things we've heard. And I agree, there's no immediate next steps. This is just kind of an exploratory conversation. And I know we'll be discussing this at our next council meeting on August 5th. And I just want to echo that I think it was very characteristic of Freeport to hear so much about collaboration and working together to find a solution. And I can promise that council will also work in that spirit as well as we decide whether to change anything or not. So, yeah. Any other final thoughts from the council?
Yeah, I've got a question. So where does this leave us? Where do we go from here? Because we have a history of diving into issues and it taking a lot longer than we think. And I know we can't set a clear timeline and expectations tonight, but what can the public expect? When are we going to lay out additional data points that we need to collect? How are we going to keep this moving in a way that's accountable, but also gets us to a solution? Because there's a lot riding on getting this right. And I want us to to make the right decisions, but I also want us to do it in a timely manner. And so that's my parting question
Yeah.
to the council.
If you have any thoughts on that now, I'd be very happy to discuss them. And I also, we kind of planned this with understanding we have this on our agenda for the August 5th council meeting. So to have this information, have this input, digest it, think about it, and kind of come back on the 5th to discuss our next steps in our action plan. Councilor Pilch?
One thing to add to that in terms of timing, if we're not going to make a decision and solve the problem in a week or two, we should think about, is this going to run away and get ahead of us before we get a chance to solve
Exactly.
the problem?
Yeah.
So we may want to put the brakes on and say, let's not allow things to happen while we're thinking about it in a timely manner. So
Yeah.
one of the things to consider.
I agree. Councilor Smith?
I think one of the answers to that as well, and I appreciate what Councilor Pilch said in terms of there are a lot of moving pieces here, and some of them are not directly under the council's purview. And I think as it goes to some of the comments that folks had who were here tonight, in terms of why is this coming up now, and also what are we going to do about it? I do think that the Village Corridor Initiative is a significant piece of that, and that's certainly not something that's going to happen overnight. That's going to be in the works for months, and so only, I would say, one of the components of our topic tonight is addressed there, really, which is primarily about the on-street parking question. And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Village Corridor Initiative, it's a partnership between the town of Freeport and MDOT to reimagine what the length of US Route 1 is from exit 20 all the way up to Upper Mass Landing. And so how wide Main Street is there on-street parking, and where are the crosswalks, where are the traffic signals? All of that is going to be sort of under a microscope for the next several months, and where cars are turning off to park, where are they getting back on Main Street? All of that is a big part of that. So that's just a small piece. It doesn't really answer the paid or unpaid or any of that. And I think that's where we'll have to try to figure out what is our strategy for moving forward in terms of that conversation.
So, oh, always you first.
I don't want to be labored and I don't want to monopolize the microphone, but on the Village Corridor Initiative, I thought it might be interesting to tease an idea out in public tonight that I think is coming up before us. It's not related to parking, but it's probably of interest to the same community that's here tonight. One of the ideas that came out of the Village Corridor Initiative is to look at that intersection of Bow Street and Main Street, which has a lot of pavement, a lot of room for cars to whip around the corner and turn right faster and get traffic through town as quickly as possible. One of the ideas that we're studying is what happens if we make that a three-way stop. So no right turn lane, one lane coming from all directions, everybody stops. So there could be a few benefits. We reclaim more space to do interesting things right in the center of our town. A lot of people consider that a town square. Right now we can't use it because it's filled with traffic. It also slows cars down, hopefully in a good way. So merchants have said, we like it that cars take a little bit of time to get through town, and they look in the window and say, maybe I'll stop there for a sandwich. They don't want cars whipping through town. If we do it wrong, then people don't want to go through town at all because it just takes too long to get through. So instead of making the change and saying we're done, we're going to test it. I say we, I'm taking a lot of credit, but it's really Brett and the Maine Department of Transportation and Eric and a bunch of other people involved. But we're going to do something temporary, put up some cones and paint and Jersey barriers and say, does this really mess up traffic or is it acceptable? Probably going to do a test in the fall, I think, if council agrees and if we can get things organized.
So we have
approved.
final suggestions or proposals, options for council to consider in other business on Tuesday.
On the 5th. So
On
really what
the
we're
5th.
trying to do tonight is get attendance up to our council meeting.
Yeah, everybody should come on the 5th.
So I won't say any more. Come on the 5th. Aren't all-
On the 5th, come on the 5th. I will, or if you can't come on the 5th, the agendas post on Thursday with a wonderful, colorful background memo from our development director outlining the budget, the parameters, and the options available to council. I, just because there might be people who don't have the scorecard for inside baseball of the town council, I think it's important to kind of be clear that the discussion ahead of the council regarding parking has so many different pieces. We saw that when we tried to put this presentation together, where we left a lot on the table. We didn't even put it in the presentation. The elements around how much parking do we need and where is the prime location for parking? I think those will begin to tease out as we see developments come through Project Review Board, as you get information from the Village Corridor Initiative coming back to council. And I think those discussions at the council around the bigger ideas to refer things to the planning board for action will be huge and great places for the community to weigh in. I think the most immediate issue in front of council right now that will be on the agenda on Tuesday is this question of, if we don't have the ability to regulate paid parking in the downtown, in the village area, that is on private parking, do we need to take a pause and not allow that to happen, which I think we've kind of danced around a little bit. So that is the question that council is going to grapple with in terms of, do we want to set a public hearing on that very question of a moratorium? The planning board is going to hold a public hearing. Anybody who's in the village should have already gotten a beautiful little flyer about that. That public hearing is going to be on the 6th. So those are places that the community will impact, that will give council some immediate answers, Matt, to decide kind of what are the next steps forward. But I don't think that this is a full discussion that you're going to have in 6 months or 8 months. I think initially you'll get the feedback you need to determine whether or not we're going to pause things, and then we're going to work through step by step.
Well said. Yeah, I was going to wrap up. So I think that concludes our workshop for the evening. I just want to thank staff for their hard work on this presentation. Thank everyone for coming here. Thank council for being here as well. And keep a lookout for more information on this. Thank you.